speaking of impressive, today's episode is very impressive, and I'm excited to share with you that if you've been listening to our Chitty Chat Chat, I'm sure you can already tell that Brian Greenwald, VP of Business Development at Generate Impact, is going to be a phenomenal guest for us today as he talks to us about technology in our sector. So that's going to be a really good conversation. And thank you to our presenting sponsors. You see their logos in front of you. These companies exist for you, your mission, your goals, and everything that you are doing good in your community. So please do check them out and give them a like, some love, and some follow. So thank you to our sponsors. Thank you also.
Hold on. I was just thinking, look at our sponsors. Look at how many of them are tech oriented. They may not have started out that way, but
that's true.
Look at how this has morphed and how they've come to meet the challenges of our sector. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
Technology. Yeah. Well, and thank you also to Julia Patrick for coming up with this amazing show 18 months ago and allowing me to play alongside you. It's a lot of fun. So we are co-hosting today. It's great to be back in the seat with you. And again, back to today's guest, we have Brian Greenwald with us today. Hello. And with Generate Impact. So welcome, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here again so soon.
Yeah.
Last time I was here, I was on vacation, and I was a little bit of a deer in the headlights because of the context switching, but I am working today, so I feel a little bit more in my element.
Perfect.
Well, we had you on, and I have to witness to you, Brian. It was wackadoo because if I'm not mistaken, I was broadcasting from Mexico.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And it was the first day of a week of broadcasting. So we weren't quite sure how it was going to go. And then we had you, and you were in Florida or
Florida. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really interesting. But what was so cool is that the technology really did allow us to have this international conversation. And so we loved what you had to say, wanted to bring you back. Before we get into our whole thing, talk to us about Generate Impact and what it is that you do.
Yeah, so Generate Impact is a technology services company. But what's more important about us is that we consider ourselves a benevolent business. That means that we focus on being profit enabled and not profit driven. And we are inspired by benevolence creation in the world. We think that the people who have chosen a career in service of improving the lives of others are the real heroes of this world, as opposed to movie stars and sports stars who are great, but that's different. So we're solely focused on celebrating and serving humanitarian, social impact, and sustainability organizations and causes. And I'll have to say it's been the most fulfilling experience of my career because of that.
Yeah. Are you a B Corp?
We are not. It's something that we are looking into, but it's a long process. And right now, just busy taking care of business as usual.
I think I've asked you that before, but I couldn't remember the answer. But it's such an interesting topic for another day, and because it's a huge topic. Okay, we were teasing you in the Chitty Chat Chat, but today we're going to talk about tech team augmentation. And I will witness to you when you say augmentation in front of a woman, especially a woman of my advanced years. All sorts of bells go off, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's about time, maybe for a little work here. But unfortunately, I don't think we're talking about that, are we?
Yeah, I'm going to avoid that one like the plague right now, for sure.
Me too. I'm going to plead the fifth. I'm not quite sure what we're talking about, but
well, so the other term that people use for this is staff augmentation, but we don't use that term because staff augmentation might give the impression that it's sort of hiring agency or something like that. But tech team augmentation is different. So when you think about working with your vendor as opposed to having your vendor work for you, that's where tech team augmentation comes into play. So the reality is, and I had this conversation with a very high level technology person at a global nonprofit. They said, no matter how big your nonprofit is, you're technology rich and resource poor. And what they meant by that was that the technology is really easy to get, especially for nonprofits. Like you can get the Salesforce nonprofit cloud for free, but the reality is that it's never for free, because the amount of knowledge that you need to have, the amount of effort it takes to configure, to maintain, to make the business processes around it, and to provide the support to staff for adoption and lifecycle management is prohibitive. So that's why there's a whole cottage industry of organizations that just exist to show you how to use Salesforce, for example. And so it's really important that you have that partner that is technology agnostic, meaning that they don't have skin in the game for selling licenses or pushing a particular product or technology, that they're there actually to be the client side advocate when it comes to technology, to fill the gaps, to provide expertise that is very difficult to have in-house, and to actually be a voice within the organization that doesn't have sort of skin in the game in one particular outcome, and can really advocate and focus on success of the organization through technology. Because the reality is, you're not going to separate those considerations anymore. You're going to have to be thinking about technology as you're thinking of everything else, and even more so now in the world of COVID and post-COVID. We're not going back to the old way. And so being able to navigate technology is absolutely essential. And it's very, very difficult to hire for every need internally. And that doesn't matter whether you have a large organization or a small organization, you're going to need technology support. And we believe the best way to do that is with a partner.
So let me ask you this. I mean, I get what you're saying and I totally agree with it, but my next level question is, do you need to have somebody that understands the nonprofit sector to do this and to do this well?
Absolutely.
You do? You think so?
That's absolutely
Wow.
correct. And that's one of the reasons that, we exclusively focus on this industry, because what we found, and this is what some of our most keystone clients have told us, is that they can get these services from commodity organizations that work in the for-profit world, but they don't get them. The culture is different, the priorities are different.
Okay.
The understanding of the why is different. And it's really hard to be an organization that works for the potato chip factory and works for the mission-driven nonprofit. And so having that sensibility and actually going in caring more about the mission than the invoice is really critical. And some of our biggest wins over the last few years have been organizations that said, yeah, we know that there's bigger, more established options out there, but we choose you because you seem to care more. And that's really important, because the people who work in nonprofits are there because of their heart-centered nature, right? They could make more money elsewhere, but they chose to work in that arena because they care about others. And so having vendors and partners who share that sentiment is really critical, so that you can get the best service and you can have a partner that's working with you, as I said before.
Well, hopefully we're changing the competitive salary, because I'm a huge proponent for that, as well as we really need to pay our high caliber talent. But one of the questions I wanted to ask in particular here is, how often would you recommend kind of doing a tech assessment, especially as technology advancements are continuing every single millisecond? So how often would you recommend that we as an organization really, assess our technology, where we are and then where we need to go?
That's where having, I think, a technology partner is actually the most valuable, because that organization that you're working with, they're out there working with other organizations, and they're dealing with a much broader landscape of products that you, when you're just trying to focus on your mission, can get exposure to and knowledge around. And so doing those assessments, what we like to call discoveries or assessments, is of critical importance. And then having that organization that's with you all the time, that understands how you got to that point, who understands your business culture, who understands the challenges that you're facing, can be a real asset in navigating that and creating a roadmap. One of the things that we find a lot of organizations really actually are not working in their best interests is in the way they're writing RFPs. So they'll ask for an RFP where they're saying, predict the future and tell me how much it will cost in a fixed, without sort of splitting out that assessment from the build phase. And so what happens is that these organizations that are bidding on these projects, they have to bid for risk. They have to assume the worst case scenario and price for risk. But if you kind of separate that assessment and do that in an ongoing way, but do it with a partner that you can speak shorthand with, and just have that roadmap. Okay, it's not just about solving today's problem. It's about where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be in 5 years? What's on the horizon in our particular sector that we're focused on that we need to be prepared for? And having a partner that's there with you every step of the way, it's of critical importance. And we think it's actually one of the, I basically spend all my time trying to convince organizations, no, don't do the whole thing. Let's do an assessment first to make sure that we're solving the right problem, to make sure that we're aligning the spend with the actual outcome. And what we actually find is that when you split that assessment and discovery from the build phase, it actually ends up being a smaller investment over time because there's less ambiguity, you're making less guesses, there's less rework. And actually, it's a really important risk mitigation exercise.
I love that. I think that is so important. And I can imagine that's not always the easiest to sell or to really like deliver the value around why it's important to start that way. But I really appreciate that point of view.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of what you're saying is in the past, we would have had somebody on site on our team. I mean, I think of the old Saturday Night Live, skits where they had the tech team and their first thing would always be like, up, 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 like get out of your chair, get out of your, office, let me take over and fix things. Yeah. But we have moved beyond that for many reasons. So talk to us about that. Are we giving something up when we don't have that on-site talent? I mean, can we do this remotely?
Well, surprisingly, what I'm going to advocate is a hybrid solution.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So obviously there's some structural changes that have resulted in on-site IT being less important. So for example, we don't have on-premise servers as much. We don't have as on-premise software as much. Things are moving into the cloud. We have software as a service. Most of the products that nonprofits are dealing with are software as a service. And so those constraints are definitely gone. But as we'll, talk about in the work from home scenario, there's issues, working with hardware gets more complex. What we really advocate, and this is a really important value for those nonprofit focused technology vendors, is that you have to focus on creating self-sufficiency, right? So, because of the nature, because of that donor dollar being so sacred, you don't want a vendor that's going to come in and just camp out, be the keeper of all the knowledge, where you're so dependent on them that if they went away one day or if there was some sort of issue, you're stuck. You want to have a mix of resources, people who understand the decisions that were made, understand how the software has been configured, understand and work alongside your partner to drive self-sufficiency, appropriate self-sufficiency, right? Because nobody chose to work at a nonprofit because they said, well, I feel like wrestling with technology all day. So the things that are keeping you from actually focusing on outcomes and focusing on mission, let somebody else deal with that. The legacy system, that's a total pain. Let somebody else deal with that. So you can focus on what's next. You can focus on making an impact, but have just enough expertise in-house so that you feel empowered and so that you can be self-sufficient where it makes sense to do so. So my suggestion is hybrid. And a good tech team partner that actually cares about your mission is actually going to help you do that. And as a matter of fact, some of the assessments that we do is evaluating staff and making recommendations of who they should be hiring. Yes. And how can we train them and how can we focus on lifecycle management and adoption support. So it's about working with you, not working for you. And I think that's the right mix.
So that was going to be my question, because I have coached and worked with a lot of organizations that, I've said, and I'm not a tech person, but I'll say you don't have the right systems. You don't have the right systems to build efficiency and, all of these other ways that I think you could really be more successful. And the pushback from, we don't have, our volunteers are really uncomfortable with technology. And I'm saying, well, then you may not have the right volunteers in the right place. So tell me, if you would, Brian, how you really go into assessing the technology needs as they relate, of course, to that marriage, I'm going to say, with the team.
Oh, I am so glad that you asked that, because what we find often is that organizations, and this is not, relegated to the nonprofit world,
Mhm.
are looking at the problem from the wrong end of the telescope. I had a call with someone in New Zealand just the other day, who said, well, we picked a system, we configured it, and we gave it to our people, and now they're not using it.
Right.
Why are they not using it? Well, because you actually start with looking at people and processes. You start with thinking about adoption and lifecycle management, and then you figure out what technology is going to be that accelerator. Because at the end of the day, actually, technology is not the solution to any problem. Technology is an accelerator of solutions, but human beings are always the solution. And so you have to think about it in terms of, what will it take for people to be the best version of themselves in pursuing the mission, A, as individuals,
Right.
B, what will allow them to do that together, that's process and team building, and then C, and only C, how can technology be a participating factor? But when you start with, we need this tool, and then we'll figure out how to make it work for our organization, you're actually setting yourself up for a problem. And going back to your initial point about volunteers who are sort of technology shy, that's exactly why you start with adoption. And we can talk about human-centered design processes some other day, but talking to your people, allowing them to participate, understanding what their real pain points and friction points are, and then building towards technology from there is actually the way to bridge that gap. People forget that technology is actually there to support the people who are using it, not the other way around. The people are not there for the technology. And so if you start with that approach, you're actually setting yourself up for a lot of resistance and confusion and lack of adoption.
I love the accelerator. You said it's there to accelerate.
Yeah.
And then you said something else about, we could talk about this at another time. So I want to make sure it's the human-centered
Design, yes.
design.
Mhm.
Yes, please. We need more tech talk.
We do.
Let's do it.
Okay. So we don't have much time left. I mean, it's just flown by, but I did want to have you address the work from home input. I'm going to use the word input because it's evident that we have a workforce that for the most part really likes this, that efficiencies have changed in many ways, gotten better. But it seems to me that if we're going to do this and embrace this, we need to really make sure that our tech is even working better than ever before. And so
Yeah,
I'd
it
love
becomes
to
mission
talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you
it
think?
becomes absolutely mission critical. So I did consult with our director of platform technology, John Bain, who has about 20 years of experience working in internal IT. And he gave me 4 points to share.
Okay.
Because I'm not an expert in this, obviously, but he is. And the first thing he raised, and he said, above all other considerations is security. That is a huge consideration.
Okay.
Because we're working from home, coffee shops, basically co-working spaces, people let their guard down, and things like multi-factor authentication and just being really aware of your environment and the networks that you're on and the decisions you make when you walk away from your computer, and even at home, you should put it to sleep or log out. Those things are easy to forget and to have challenges with. And so there's policies that you can put in place where things time out and you have to relog in, et cetera, to protect yourself. And most organizations might have a hard time putting together, say, VPN regime, for example. And that's where a tech team partner could be really helpful. The next is just the sort of human challenge of communicating is one thing, connection is another thing. And so when you're working remotely, and I'm not going to quote all of the different scientific studies around the way that it actually creates a lot of stress when your whole experience with people is in this little box. it becomes hard, especially for new employees that have been hired since the pandemic, of creating those work connections. And it has a lot to do with job satisfaction, retention, and also effectiveness of teams. And so figuring out strategies, and we've been trying all sorts of different things because we're quite spread out. It's really important to think about that. Then finally, two more things. The other is like, when you have employees that have disabilities, who have very special needs, there's a lot of effort that needs to go into accommodating them to make sure that they have the equipment and the environment that they need to be as effective at work, and that those sort of artificial barriers are not in the way. And then finally, hardware. That really is the biggest challenge. So debugging hardware from a distance. There are definitely programs that can help you do that, but that is a skill in itself. And then in terms of getting an employee that new laptop that's properly configured, that's not going to have any issues, it requires a lot of thinking, and it's a challenge that organizations are going to have to address head on. So those are just four of those things. If John was here, he's, like I said, he's an expert. He could talk about it for an hour. Maybe you should have him as a guest one day, just talk about that.
I think we should. One of the questions we get often in our ask and answer is, the team wants to work from home or work remotely, really. Is it okay to use their own personal laptop or their own personal hardware? Or should it be an organizational issued hardware or system? And then that brings in another level, right? Of, well, two things. One, we actually had someone say, I would like to purchase my own, but my partner in life does not want me to spend that money. And then we also have the organization saying, we don't have this in our budget. So
yeah, it's a tough challenge. And I know John's going to say, hey, absolutely, it needs to be a company issued piece of hardware that has
sure, I get that.
Company policies that can be wiped remotely, that can be supported remotely. But yeah, it's a challenge. And I do think that there are organizations out there that provide grants and provide funding for those type of things. But I think that it is definitely, for all of the other reasons that I described around security and around support, it is preferable. And, when you go to work someplace, you don't expect to have to supply your own equipment. And
right.
So, while you might not have the budget, you have to think about, if it was any other organization, what would the basic expectation that your employer is going to provide you, the materials and the equipment that you need to do your job? Seems pretty straightforward. Obviously every situation is a challenge, but with all of the things that I described, whether you're a small nonprofit or whether you're a huge multinational nonprofit, how can you afford not to do these things correctly? Because the risk is immense. When you think about the potential for data breaches, when you think about the potential for ransomware, when you think about the potential of lost productivity and opportunity cost,
right?
You really need to think long and hard about, well, if we don't do this, are we going to be successful? And so you have to kind of look at the cost a little differently than
the cost of risk.
Thinking of these things as an investment and not a cost.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
Wow.
I think we do need John on as well.
Oh yeah, John would be great.
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things that Jarrett has really illuminated for so many of our viewers, I know for me from the beginning, that if you see a component of structural vulnerability within your organization, you need to move that forward and actively search for funding, for grants, for low-cost loans, whatever it might be, so that you can fulfill that investment. And, it's like presence, front of mind, top of presence allows you to navigate some of these things. And I can't think of many times when I've sat in on a meeting with a nonprofit and they've had an active roadmap for pursuing technology advances. They'll complain about it and they'll talk about how it's really creating problems, but stepping back and saying, okay, this is what we're going to work on. It doesn't always seem like that's being tackled. I don't know, Jarrett, do you see that?
No, I think I would agree. I see that often, especially with small nonprofits, and we are very much a small nonprofit centric sector. There's a lot of organizations that are really scrappy and doing so much with very little. And when I come in and do an interim succession plan with an organization, Brian, one time this organization, they're a C3, they were operating off of an association database. And I'm like, you don't have members. I don't understand. So we could not pull donor-centric data because they simply didn't have the right system.
Oh, I'm so glad that you said that. So we have a really wonderful partner that I'd love to give a shout out to, who also should be a great guest, Knowledge Advisory Group. And they focus on program evaluation and impact evaluation. And they do a great job of humanizing data. And when I sit down and talk with them, we end up spending the whole hour talking about how the CRM or the technology product that they have, used beyond its design intent is preventing the, Knowledge Advisory Group from accomplishing their goals with the client because they can't pull the data. They can't cross-reference the data because there hasn't been that thought. So the reality is that you cannot escape it anymore. You have to address technology first if you're going to be effective in your mission. Like the genie's out of the bottle, it's not going back in. Like I said, that same call with New Zealand was one of the largest nonprofits in the world. And they said, look, direct fundraising, we understand there's an expiration date on it.
Right.
And we need to adapt, and bringing everyone along is critical. So whether you're a very small local nonprofit or whether you're a huge multinational nonprofit, the challenges are the same. The manifestation of them are different because you're going to be different. And that's where, having a partner that can help you navigate that is important. But the pattern of issues is pretty similar across the entire industry.
And I'm imagining too, as we continue to grow in this life cycle, the tech assessment continues to change.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's, where I talk about don't just solve today's problem, but think about so if you just, make an investment that solves today's problem, you're going to be doing it again in a year.
Right. You want to be able to grow with that system.
Yeah. So life cycle management means a couple of things. Maybe I should clarify that term. One is it's who's going to maintain this and keep it humming. How are we going to get the most out of this investment? Make sure we're providing the right support. But then how's it going to grow with us? What does it need to be a year from now or 3 years from now or 5 years from now? You need to think about that at the same time that you're thinking about people and process, and making sure that you have a plan for that. So it's about having a long-term roadmap while you're making incremental steps to address today's issues.
I love it. Well,
we have Sasha Lewis from Moves Management, and she talks often about how typically organizations have a donor-centered, database, and they will say, "Oh, this isn't working for me. We need and want a new one." But she helps them realize there's so many bells and whistles that you're actually not utilizing. So before we invest in a whole new system, perhaps we assess the system that you do have, and are you using it thoroughly? Right, for what your intention and expectations are. So much synergy, there. And as we started the show, Julia, a lot of our sponsors are very tech centered or tech based. And I think all of us organically and by default now very much have a tech piece of our everyday life and responsibility. Even me, the nonprofit nerd, oh my gosh, I have invested in my own tech systems to help my life to be a little bit smoother, to accelerate, right?
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, this has been great. We could talk to you for so long, and I suspect that we will be. Brian Greenwald, I was thinking I should call you Brian the Brain, because it's
no.
No, it's great. It's really, really cool. Check out Generate Impact. They have some amazing blog articles on there. They talk about case studies with the different folks that they work with around the world. So it's really a fascinating lens into how and why you should be looking at partners in your technology. It's not the normal thing that you would think of. And I think it's been really fun to meet you, Brian, and to see all the different things that Generate Impact is doing. Again, I'm Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. Been joined today by the nonprofit nerd herself, Jarrett Ransom, CEO of the Raven Group. Hey, we want to make sure that we thank all of our presenting sponsors who've been with us, who themselves have been on a journey of tech since we first started. I see this all the time with our sponsors, how they're really moving through this new ecosystem, which is actually going to end up being far superior for all of us, I think. And so we want to say
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a cool thing to be where we sit, where Jarrett and I sit, and we get to see the acceleration of these organizations and how they're adopting to be even better servants in our
evolution. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
It is. It's really a cool thing. Hey, another great Monday, a great start to the week, don't you think, Jarrett?
Amazing. It's like, okay, I want to have you back on for so many of these conversations. We really need to get John back on as well. And what a great way to accelerate and be the catalyst for our week. So thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful.
It's been a great pleasure. I'd love to come back soon.
Well, just as a quick, and I know we got to wrap up, but Brian's going to be visiting the AFP chapter in Phoenix, Arizona soon. We had on that president, Tina Lopez, talking about how and why you should be engaging in a professional organization. And so it's really cool to see that we were able to make some introductions, and you'll be coming out. So I'm
really excited about it in spite of the heat.
Yes. Well, it's not bad now, so nothing to worry about it this time.
I don't know. We'll see. But hey, as we like to end every show, we certainly want to remind all of you to stay well so you can do well. See you back here tomorrow, everybody.